In a small, peaceful town in Georgia, there lived a quiet man named Calvin Reed. Most people in the neighborhood didn't know much about him. He was friendly, but private. He didn't talk much, and he didn't show off what he had. Calvin was a tall man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a slow, confident walk. He lived alone in a small wooden house at the edge of town, the kind of place people pass every day without noticing. For years, Calvin watched the town change. Big companies started buying old land. New stores appeared, fancy homes replaced old ones. A powerful group called the HOA, Homeowners Association, began to control everything around. They acted like they owned the whole place. They told people what kind of fence to build, what color to paint their houses, and even where to park their cars. And most people followed their rules, but Calvin, he never joined. He didn't like how they pushed people around. He just stayed quiet and minded his own business. One morning, Calvin woke up to loud machines outside his window. The sound of bulldozers and drills filled the air. When he stepped out, he saw construction crews cutting trees and marking land, his land. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Maybe the workers had the wrong address. But when he went closer, one of the men in a shiny vest told him, "Sir, you need to move. This land is under new development by the HOA." Calvin looked at him calmly and said, "New development? That's funny. I don't remember selling my land." The worker shrugged and kept working. Soon big trucks and concrete mixers filled the area. The HOA had plans to build 12 new commercial buildings, shops, offices, and a cafe. It was a big project worth millions. But there was one big problem. The land they were building on belonged to Calvin Reed. He could have stopped them right there. He could have gone to the police or shown his papers. But Calvin didn't. He just stood there, quiet as ever, and watched. Days turned into weeks. The buildings started taking shape. The HOA's president, Mr. Parker, was proud of the project. He often came to the site in his expensive suit, telling everyone how great this development would be for the community. He never once looked at Calvin, even though the old man often stood nearby, watching with calm eyes and a small, knowing smile. Neighbors wondered why Calvin didn't fight back. Some whispered that he was scared. Others said he was too old to care. But none of them knew the truth. Calvin had a plan, a quiet plan. He knew something the HOA didn't, something that would change everything. When the last building was finally complete, shining glass, polished floors, and big for-lease signs, the HOA organized a grand opening ceremony. Local business owners, officials, and media gathered. Everyone was smiling and clapping. Mr. Parker stepped up to the microphone and said proudly, "This is the future of our town. A new beginning for our community." Then, in the middle of the applause, Calvin Reed slowly walked onto the stage. He held a small brown folder in his hand, old, worn, and dusty. The crowd went silent. Calvin opened the folder, pulled out a deed, and said in a calm but powerful voice, "Before you built your future, maybe you should have checked who owned your land." The color drained from Mr. Parker's face. The crowd gasped. Cameras started flashing. Calvin just stood there, peaceful but firm. The man they ignored, the man they thought was powerless, had just turned the entire story upside down. The quiet man had finally spoken. The crowd stood frozen. Cameras flashed as Calvin Reed held the old brown folder high in the air. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then a few people started whispering. Reporters leaned forward, trying to hear what was happening. Mr. Parker, the proud HOA president, looked confused and angry at the same time. He stepped toward Calvin and said, "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This property belongs to the HOA now." Calvin's calm eyes didn't blink. "No misunderstanding," he said quietly. "This land belonged to my father, and before him, my grandfather. It has never been sold." "You built on private property?" Gasps spread through the audience. Some people looked at each other in shock. A few even stepped back, afraid of what was about to happen. The reporters quickly surrounded Calvin, holding out microphones. "Sir, is this true? Do you have proof?" One shouted. Calvin nodded slowly and opened the folder. Inside was a stack of yellowed papers, the original land deed signed over 70 years ago. The old ink was faded, but the seal was still visible. It clearly showed the Reed family name as the rightful owner. Mr. Parker's smile faded completely. He turned to his lawyers standing near the stage. They flipped through their files in panic. They had never seen these documents before. They had trusted the county records, which somehow showed the land as unclaimed. No one had checked deeper. Calvin spoke again, his voice steady but full of quiet fire. When your people came to my land, I said nothing. I watched. I waited. I let you finish. Because I wanted you to see what happens when you build lies on stolen ground. The crowd went silent again. Mr. Parker's face turned red. He whispered something to his lawyer, who quickly pulled out a phone and made a call. The situation was collapsing in front of hundreds of witnesses and cameras. Soon, police officers arrived at the scene. The ceremony was cut short. The media swarmed around Calvin, asking question after question. But Calvin said little. He only repeated, "I have the deed. That's all that matters." By the next morning, Calvin's story was everywhere on local news, social media, and newspapers. Headlines read, "Elderly man outsmarts HOA, proves ownership after construction of 12 buildings." Some people laughed, others cheered. For many, Calvin became a quiet hero, a man who didn't need to shout to make his point. Behind the scenes, chaos hit the HOA office. Mr. Parker couldn't sleep. The investors were calling nonstop, demanding answers. The buildings, worth millions, were now sitting on land they didn't legally own. Their lawyers warned them that if the deed was real, and it was, the entire project could be taken away by one man. Mr. Parker tried to reach Calvin. He drove to the old wooden house and knocked on the door. When Calvin opened it, Parker forced a smile. "Mr. Reed, I think we can make a deal," Parker said softly. "We can offer you a large sum of money for the land. You'll never have to worry again." Calvin looked at him for a long moment. "You already took what wasn't yours," he replied. "Now you want to buy forgiveness?" Parker swallowed hard. "Please, we can fix this," he insisted. "Just name your price." Calvin smiled, the same calm, knowing smile he had when the construction began. "You still don't understand, Mr. Parker. This isn't about money. It's about respect. My family's name means something, even if you forgot to look." Parker didn't know what to say. He left in silence, defeated. That evening, Calvin sat on his porch as the sun went down. The buildings stood tall in the distance, shining in the sunset. To everyone else, they were just glass and steel. But to Calvin, they were proof. Proof that patience and truth could still win in a world that often forgot both. He took a deep breath and whispered, "My father would have been proud." But deep down, Calvin knew this wasn't over yet. For the next few days, Calvin Reed's quiet life changed completely. Reporters came from every corner of the state. Cars lined up outside his small wooden house. Everyone wanted to hear from the man who fooled the HOA, but Calvin didn't enjoy the attention. He had never wanted to be famous. He just wanted justice. One afternoon, while he was sipping tea on his porch, a black car stopped in front of his gate. Out came a woman in a sharp gray suit. She introduced herself as Linda Hayes, a lawyer who had been following his story. "Mr. Reed," she said politely, "I believe you'll need help. The HOA has already filed a case in court to challenge your ownership." Calvin smiled softly. "Of course they did," he said. "They built their empire on my land. Now, they'll try to steal it on paper." Linda nodded. "They're powerful, but not unstoppable. If your deed is valid, you can win. But we'll need to dig into old records, very old ones." That night, Calvin took Linda into his small living room. He opened a chest his father had left him. Inside were old maps, faded photos, and more papers, all proof that his family had owned the land for generations. As they went through the papers, Calvin told her stories of his grandfather, who had worked the soil with his bare hands, and of his father, who built the house that still stood strong. "This land isn't just dirt," Calvin said quietly. "It's memory." The next morning, the courthouse was packed. Cameras, reporters, and curious townsfolk filled every seat. The HOS team arrived first, 10 lawyers, all in expensive suits. Mr. Parker led them, his face hard but nervous. Calvin walked in alone, carrying his old brown folder. Linda followed close behind, holding the rest of the documents. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The case began. The HOA's lawyer spoke first. He claimed that the land was abandoned property, the Calvin's deed was outdated and invalid, and that the HOA had legally purchased the rights from the county. His voice was strong, confident, the voice of a man used to winning. Then it was Linda's turn. She stood tall and calm. "Your Honor," she began, "this is not a case about paperwork. It's about erasure. My client's family has lived on that land for over 70 years. The HOA didn't check history. They erased it." She placed the old deed on the table. Along with tax receipts and photographs showing the Reed family over the decades, the judge leaned forward, examining the papers. The courtroom grew silent. Then Calvin stood up and spoke for the first time. His voice was slow, deep, and full of weight. "I let them build because I wanted the truth to show itself. I wanted the world to see how easy it is to take from a quiet man. But the truth doesn't vanish, even if you bury it under concrete." His words echoed through the courtroom. Even the opposing lawyers looked uneasy. After hours of arguments, the judge finally spoke. "Mr. Reed," he said, "the documents appear authentic. We will verify them through the county archives. Until then, the HOA must stop all operations on the property." Gasps filled the room. Mr. Parker clenched his fists. His empire was slipping away. Outside the courthouse, people cheered. Some held signs that read "Justice for Calvin." Others shouted "Power to the people." Calvin didn't smile. He just looked at the sky and whispered, "One step closer." That night, Linda received a call from a county official. There was something strange in the records, something that could make the case even bigger. "Mr. Reed," she said when she called him, "we found a missing document, one that proves your family owned more land than we thought. A lot more." Calvin froze, the phone trembling in his hand. The battle wasn't just about 12 buildings anymore. It was about the entire town, and the storm was only beginning. The next morning, Calvin woke up to the sound of his phone ringing again. It was Linda, his lawyer. Her voice was urgent. "Mr. Reed, you need to see this for yourself. I'm at the county records office. What we found changes everything." Calvin put on his old jacket and drove into town. The courthouse was buzzing with reporters, but he slipped past them quietly and entered the old records building. A dusty place filled with shelves of forgotten history. Linda met him at a table covered with papers and maps. She looked serious. "This," she said, pointing to a faded blueprint, "is the original survey map from 1952. Your grandfather's land wasn't just the area where the HOA built. It stretches beyond almost half the business district today." Calvin's eyes widened. "Half the town?" She nodded. "The records were changed in the 1980s. Someone altered the boundaries. They erased your family's name and replaced it with the label Public Development Land. It was hidden in the archives for decades." Calvin ran his fingers over the map. He could still see the faint writing. Reed Family Estate. His heart tightened. All those years, his family's land had been stolen little by little, and no one had ever told them? "They took everything," he whispered. Linda placed a hand on his shoulder. "We can prove it now. But if we do, the case will become huge. The HOA, the county office, even developers, they'll all come after you." Calvin gave a small, tired smile. "They already came after me. They just don't know I'm still standing." That afternoon, Linda filed a motion to expand the case. She added new claims of forgery, fraud, and illegal land transfer. The courthouse buzzed again. News channels began calling it the land that time forgot. Inside the HOA headquarters, chaos erupted. Mr. Parker slammed his hands on the table. How could this happen? He shouted, "Didn't anyone check the full records?" His assistant stammered, "Sir, the files were sealed. No one thought they were important." "Sealed by who?" Parker snapped. The room went silent. No one answered. But deep down, Parker already knew. Some of the people who helped him start the HOA had been involved with the land deal 30 years ago, and now their secrets were about to come out. That night, Calvin sat alone on his porch, staring at the stars. He remembered his father's words, "The land will always remember who it belongs to." Suddenly, headlights appeared in the distance. A black SUV stopped at his gate. Two men in suits stepped out. Mr. Reed, one said coldly, "You've made powerful enemies. You should drop this case before someone gets hurt." Calvin didn't move. His voice was calm. "You think I'm afraid? You already took everything from me. What else can you steal?" The men exchanged a glance, then drove away into the night. Linda arrived minutes later, worried. "You need protection," she said. "This isn't just legal anymore. It's political." But Calvin refused to hide. "If I run now," he said, "they win again." Days later, in court, Linda presented the new evidence. The judge's eyes widened as she revealed the altered maps, the false signatures, and the missing seal of the county clerk. It was undeniable. Someone had changed history. The judge ordered a full investigation. The courtroom erupted in noise. Reporters rushed outside to break the news. Meanwhile, Mr. Parker sat pale-faced, realizing his empire had been built on a lie, and that lie was now collapsing. When Calvin left the courthouse that day, the crowd cheered again, but he didn't smile. He just looked at the horizon and said softly, "Truth takes time, but it always finds its way home." And as he walked away, holding the old map close to his chest, he knew one thing for certain. The fight was far from over, because what was buried wasn't just land. It was history, and history was waking up. The courthouse lights glowed late into the night. Reporters crowded outside, waiting for new updates. Inside, files piled high on every table. The investigation had exploded beyond anyone's control. What started as one man's quiet stand had now shaken the entire town. Calvin Reed sat by the window. Watching the rain slide down the glass, he wasn't afraid, but he was tired. Every knock on the door, every car that slowed near his home, it all felt like a warning. Yet deep inside, he knew he couldn't stop now. His lawyer, Linda, entered carrying a box of new documents. Her face was serious. "Mr. Reed, you were right. The corruption goes deep. We found proof that several county officials helped the HOA cover up land records for decades. Some of them even took bribes from developers." Calvin nodded slowly. "I figured as much. Power doesn't move without money pushing it." Linda sighed. "The problem is, they're fighting back hard. They've hired a new team of lawyers, and they're claiming your grandfather's deed was forged. They even brought in experts to say the ink is too old to prove anything." Calvin smiled faintly. The ink might fade, but truth doesn't. The next morning, the courtroom was louder than ever. The HOA side presented their expert witness, a confident man in a blue suit who claimed the old deed couldn't possibly be authentic. He used fancy words, showed graphs, and smiled as he tried to dismantle Calvin's case. When it was Linda's turn, she stood calmly. "Your Honor," she said, "the deed might be old, but we have something stronger, the original county logbook." She opened a large ledger yellowed with age, showing the Reed estate listed clearly in the official handwriting of a clerk from 1952. The judge raised his eyebrows. The courtroom gasped. The witness, Stutte. Mr. Parker looked furious. His face turned pale as the truth began to pierce through his empire of lies. He leaned over to his lawyer and hissed, "We need to settle this before it destroys us." But it was too late. The fire had already spread outside. People were rallying. Protest signs filled the streets. "Give Calvin his land," and "Stop the corruption." For the first time, the town stood together, not for money, but for justice. Meanwhile, the investigation uncovered even more shocking evidence. The same officials who had erased Calvin's family name had done it to others. Two, mostly poor families who never had the power to fight back. Calvin's case had opened a door that couldn't be closed. That night, Calvin returned home to find his porch light smashed. His gate was open. Someone had broken in. Inside drawers were overturned, papers scattered. But nothing valuable was gone. Only one thing: the map. He sat down slowly, breathing hard. Whoever took the map knew it was the heart of his proof. Linda arrived soon after and saw the mess. "They're desperate," she said. "This means we're close." Calvin nodded. "They think stealing it will change the truth. But I remember every line on that map." The next day, news broke that the FBI had stepped in. Federal agents raided the HOA's offices and the county clerk's department. They seized computers, files, and hard drives. Mr. Parker was taken in for questioning. As reporters swarmed the courthouse, Calvin walked past them silently. He didn't need to speak. His calm presence said everything in the evening. Linda found him sitting by the river, the sun setting behind the trees. "They'll fall apart soon," she said softly. "You've done what no one thought possible." Calvin looked at the glowing horizon. "I didn't do it alone," he said. "This land has a voice. I just helped it speak." The wind rustled the trees. And for the first time in months, Calvin smiled, a small, peaceful smile that said the storm was almost over, but not quite yet, because justice, like the land, takes time to heal. The day of judgment arrived. The courthouse steps were crowded long before sunrise. Reporters, neighbors, and even strangers gathered to witness the end of the story that had captured the nation. People held banners that read "Justice for Calvin Reed." While camera lights flashed like lightning in a storm, inside, Calvin sat quietly beside Linda. He wore his father's old brown jacket, same one he had worn on the first day the bulldozers came. His eyes were calm, but his heart beat heavy. Months of waiting, fighting, and remembering had led to this single morning. Mr. Parker entered with a small group of lawyers. His once confident walk now looked stiff. The weight of the investigation had changed him. He had lost everything: money, reputation, and respect. Even the HOA members who once praised him now avoided his gaze. The judge, a gray-haired man with a firm voice, entered the room and called for silence. "This court has reviewed every document, every testimony, and every record related to the Reed property dispute," he began. "The truth has been buried for decades, but today that truth will see daylight." The sound of papers turning filled the room. Linda stood up first. Her voice was steady. "Your Honor, my client never wanted wealth or revenge. He only wanted what was right. The evidence proves the HOA and several county officials forged records, erased family deeds, and stole land for profit. This wasn't an error. It was theft hidden under fancy words and shiny buildings." Mr. Parker's lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised a hand. "Sit down, counselor. The facts are clear." He continued reading from his notes. "The court finds that the land in question and several surrounding properties belong legally to the Reed family estate. The altered records from 1984 are hereby declared fraudulent." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Linda smiled faintly, tears forming in her eyes. Calvin simply closed his hands together and whispered, "Thank you." The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he said, "the HOA's president, Mr. Parker, and 3 county officials are guilty of conspiracy and document fraud. They will face federal charges." Gasps echoed again. Parker's face turned pale. He lowered his head and said nothing. The judge turned to Calvin. "Mr. Reed, your patience and faith in justice have reminded us all why the law exists. You may choose what to do with the 12 buildings on your property. The choice is yours." For a long moment, Calvin didn't speak. Everyone waited. Finally, he stood, his voice calm and firm. "I don't want to destroy what was built. Those buildings can serve the people who live here. But they'll serve under one condition, that every family who lost their land gets a share of the profit. This town was built by honest hands. It's time it remembers them." The crowd erupted in applause. Even the judge smiled. "So ordered," he said, striking the gavel. Outside the courthouse, sunlight broke through the clouds. Reporters rushed forward, shouting questions, but Calvin only said one thing: It was never about land. It was about legacy. Over the next weeks, news spread across the country. The story of Calvin Reed became a symbol of truth and perseverance. The 12 buildings were renamed Reed Square, a tribute to the man who had waited quietly for justice. Local families who had been cheated years ago were invited to join the new trust that managed the property. For the first time, the town stood united. One evening, as the sun set over Reed Square, Calvin sat on a bench near the fountain. Children played, shops buzzed with life, and laughter filled the air. Linda joined him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You did it, Mr. Reed," she said softly. He smiled, watching the golden light reflect on the water. "No," he replied, "we did it. The land just waited for us to listen." A cool breeze passed through the trees. Calvin leaned back, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Now the land can rest. And so can I." The quiet man had finally found peace, not through power, but through patience.